Okay, a bit niche this one, I'll grant you, but stick with it, follow along, you'll pick up some tricks and tips, and it doesn't have to be an Oblivion dialog box, it can be anything you want. Change out the font, the colour, the images, etc. First thing, get into Fusion. So come to your effects library, go to effects, and grab your Fusion composition. Or if you're like me and you've got it in your favorites bar, just grab your Fusion comp from down there. Doesn't matter how long it is, so leave it at the default of 5 seconds and jump into Fusion. This was basically what I was working from. So I was looking for this kind of look. So the first thing we need to do is sort out the text. Grab a text node, bring it in. The font I used is King's Calligraphica 2, which I can't remember where I got it from, but it's free from somewhere. Just search it on Google, probably the font or Squirrel font or somewhere. So we've got our basic font. So we can see what it looks like. Next thing I did was change the color of the font. Probably the easiest way to do it is off your reference image. So if you click the eyedropper and drag it to your reference image and pick probably the slightly darker color, somewhere around there maybe. You can always change it a bit later on. Next, come to your shading tab. So our text has got an outline. So if you come to your element at the top, go to number 2, black outline, click enabled. All I did was bump the thickness up to full. The next thing to look at is this background. This is the thing that's going to be changing. So we will go to shading element 4, which says blue border, click enable. Now we need to come through and start setting a few things up. So the first thing we need to set up is that it covers the whole line, not just the word. Next we want to just bring it out a little bit so you've got a bit of padding on it, like so. Now the next thing we need to look at is to get the sort of grungy background going on. Now we can't do that direct here. So what we need to do is create that grungy background look. So to do that, you're going to bring in a background node and you're going to set it to this kind of color. So again, we can use our picker and just pick the sort of off-white color. So our background is now this off-white color. To get the grunginess, what I did was I got on the internet and found a texture. I will leave a link to the texture site that I used in the description, and you can go and have a poke around. So I've basically got this texture that looks like this. So what you do is you take the output of your texture and merge it onto the background. This creates this kind of look. So we need to scale our texture up to fit the background. So come to your merge node, go to size and just pull it up. Doesn't need to be exact, doesn't need to be precise, just somewhere around about there. Finally come to the apply mode and change it to multiply. And now you've got your yellow background with this grungy look, which is all very well and good, but we need it in this rectangle here. To do that, come back to your text node. You're still on element 4. Change type to image. You get a new input on your text. Take the output of your merge and drop it onto your new input. And now we can see we've got the sort of grungy pattern going on our background. Now you can come to your merge node and you can just tweak this around and you can see what you've got, and you can just find the bit that you want. And then that's quite heavy, so what you can do is maybe bring the blend down a little bit so that it's not quite as obvious. Back in your text node, we've selected image, and we want to stretch the image to fit, maybe. Have a play with these, see which settings give you the look you want. I quite like that, so I'll leave that as it is. So now with our text, we can change that to anything we want, and that box will change with it. And we can see with these sort of dropped letters, maybe we need a bit more padding, so come back and just up the vertical padding a little bit, like so. So that's your basic text setup. What we can do with element 4, and we'll do it with expressions a little bit later in the tutorial, is we can toggle your background to make your selection. So you'll have a row of 5 possible responses, and we will set up a system whereby we dictate which one has its background on. So the next thing we need to do is think about whereabouts on the screen we want to have this. So the final result will be in this bottom corner, but I'm not scaling everything down. I'm working full screen. I prefer it. It makes life easier as far as I'm concerned. So we now need to get this text sort of up here-ish, and we also need the anchor point to be on the end. So with your text selected, come to your text screen, go to H anchor and just click the left button. Now we can come to the layout tab and we can move it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over. Bear in mind you're going to have some sort of image here, so you don't want it too far over. But for this, around and about 0.16 maybe will do. Could probably go a little bit more, 0.15. And then you can just move it up the screen because you're going to have your others below it. So now you've got your basic text set up, we're just going to need to copy it. And because we've set all this up in one text, if we copy the text node, it'll be in all the others. So select your text, Control-C to copy it, and then paste 4 copies. And that'll give you your 5 lines of text, or 5 options. We're going to merge them all together, like so. And if we view the final merge node, oops, that's not the merge node. We can start, the other thing we need to do is put our text into all the other text. So just connect it up. So that our texture is now on all the different texts. So now we've got them all set up. Viewing merge 5. So you've got all your titles one on top of another here. Select each text and just drop it down on the Y axis. So you can either use your arrow or your mouse and sort of scroll the numbers, or you can grab the little arrow and just pull it down, whichever you prefer. What I did was try to get them lined up so that each of the backgrounds just touched the next one, so there was no gap. As I say, whichever you find easiest, either doing it this way or doing it with the layout tab and clicking and scrolling the numbers, like so. So now we've got your 4, 5 lots of text. And what we need to do is be able to switch the background on and off. So this is where we start getting a bit funky. I'll go through it and explain, and hopefully it'll make sense. So to get as I said earlier, to get the background to turn on and off, we want element 4 to be enabled or disabled as needed. And we can do that by using expressions. To use an expression, we need something to be referencing, so some sort of switch. And to make the switch or the choice drop down, I'm going to bring in a random node. It doesn't matter what node you use. I use the dissolve node, so shift and space bar and type dissolve. The reason I use the dissolve node is that it has very little in it. There's not many controls, and we're going to add a control. First off, rename your dissolve node. I chose C for control. You can name it whatever you want. C's just handy. And if you end up typing it, you've not got much to type. So you've got C for controls. Now you're going to right click on C. You're going to go to edit controls. And this will bring up this window which lets you add new controls to a node. What we're going to do is we're going to type in the name box. Something like response. It will be a number. We want it on this page, so the controls page, although it doesn't make a lot of difference, to be fair. And we're going to make it default to 0. We're going to make it an integer, and we're going to set the range from 0 to 4. We've got 5 choices, but 0 is classed as your first choice, so you only need 0 to 4. Next, we're going to scroll here in the input control and look for combo control. And now we need to add the options, and all we want is a row of numbers. So 1, click add, 2, add, etc. Once you've done that, click OK. And you'll notice we've now got a response control here with our choices. So we're now going to use this to drive whether these backgrounds are on or off for each of the texts. So to do that, with C selected, click on the little pin icon in the inspector. This keeps this information visible now, no matter which node you select. So if we go to our text 1, make sure element 4 is selected and right click where it says enabled and select expression. Now the expression we're going to type in is if with double I, so IIF, open parentheses, and now with your cursor flashing there, if you click and hold the plus and drag down until our C window appears, and just drop the line on response, and this will type the path to that particular control in for you. So if C response space 2 equals signs 0, because that's our first number. Like I said, 0 is your first number, so although it says 1 on the drop down, it's actually 0, comma 1, comma 0, close your parentheses. So what you're saying is, if C response has a value of 0, then set enable to 1, so checked. If it doesn't, then set it to 0, unchecked. So now if we come down to our control and move it off 1, our background will disappear. If we put it back on 1, our background will reappear. So now we need to do the same expression in each of the other texts. So the quickest way to do that is if you come back to your text 1, drag select your expression and hit Control and C to copy it. Now we're going to go down the list. So text 1_1, shading, element 4, expression, and type your expression in. And we need to change the 0 to 1. And that's literally it. And you just work down your other text, go into shading, element 4, right click on enable, put your expression, and paste. And now we're up to 0, 1, 2. This one will be 3. And your last one will be 4. And that's basically it. If you now click on C, you can use this response to change where the box goes. So you can make it look as though you're picking some sort of response. So once you've got that, it's just a case of the decoration from there on in. For decoration, I managed, with a bit of messing about, to pull half of this arrow off this screenshot. The way I did it, and it doesn't always work, it just happens to work in this instance because you've got quite a nice area of contrast, is if you bring a bitmap which connects to your media in by default the wrong way, pipe your image into your bitmap, change the channel to luma or luminance, and what you can do is you can play with the high-low threshold so that you get rid of the background. And you eventually pull kind of this image. So this will can now be used as a mask. So if you bring in a map control, take the output of your bitmap, if you right click and drag onto the map control and then just choose garbage matte, take the output of your original media into the yellow input, and if we, with our map control selected, go to garbage matte, invert, we're now left with just this arrow. All I did then was I put a crop node after it, and I cropped the image so that I was just left with the arrow. I only used half an arrow because I nicked this off YouTube, which meant I got all this nastiness in here, which clearly we don't want. So if you do it about yay. If you right click, save image, and you can save that as a PNG file, which you can then import and use to make your arrow. In good old Blue Peter fashion. Where's my arrow there? I've got the arrow from earlier, which looks like this. I then brought in a background node, made it transparent, and I merged one copy onto the background, and then I took a transform node, put the other copy into the transform and merged that back with the transform node, hit flip, and now you've got two arrowheads, and you can just pull them apart to make that as long or as short as you want. If you so desire, you can PNG this and use it direct, or you can just use this node setup. Control and G will let you put it into a group. You can then merge this onto your text output, and we can use this merge node to position and size. Oops, a bit too big. Your arrow so that it runs alongside your dialogue. Somewhere around about here. You get the idea. You just need to play and get it to look the right size, like so. After all the gubbins, I added a shadow node. And if we view the shadow and zoom in, we can now offset the shadow a bit. It just gives it that little bit of an edge. You don't want to go too mad because you've already got a black outline on these letters and it looks a bit funky if you go too wild. But you're just trying to lift this box a little bit off whatever's going to be underneath it. Finally, once you've got all this set up, after your shadow, add a transform node. The transform node becomes your major or your overall sort of size and positioning control, so you can make it a bit smaller and then you can just drag it off to wherever you want it, like so. And then you have a dialog box that you can pick the response. Take an output from your transform, pipe it into your media out, and then that will get piped back to the timeline. And you can drop that over wherever you want. So if you're doing it as a one-off, that's it. That's all you need to do. You can create a title macro out of it, which you can then use from the titles page. So you just have a title that you can drag in, drop over whatever you want, and you're good to go. With the title macro, you can set it up to display whichever choice you've made. So how do we get from this Fusion comp to this title macro? Glad you asked. So go back to Fusion, view your shadow. You don't need to view the transform for now. Set this so that it's roughly the size and position that you would normally use this at. Again, it doesn't need to be precise, although from the point of view of repeat use, it's probably as well to get it as close to the normal position as you sort of can at this stage, because this will become your default setting. So to set up the macro, click away from everything. Bring the C in so you know where it is. First thing we're going to do is we're going to change these media outs, and we're going to use loader nodes to bring in our texture and our arrowhead. The reason being that you can't save media in a macro. Well, you can, but it gets all funky if the media is not available in the project. So click in empty space, shift space bar and type loader. This will open up your Explorer Finder dialog and you want to find the image that you're going to use. In this case, it's the texture. So select the texture and open. So now this loader node is reading the image direct from your disk, not from the media pool. So once you've done this, do not move your image. So have it somewhere safe, load it into the loader node, and then just leave it alone. So you can delete your media in, and you can attach your loader node. Now we're going to do the same for our arrowhead. So open the group that had your arrowhead in it. Now we need to remember that the arrowhead is connected both to the merge and to the transform. An easy way to do it, if you hold Alt and click on the pipe just before the split, it puts a pipe router in, and that means all you need to do is connect to the pipe router rather than trying to remember to connect to everything else. So again, click inside your group, shift space bar, loader, dialog box, load your arrow image, disconnect your media in and connect your arrow, and then delete the media in. And then you can close the group again. If you want to save confusion later on, you can F2 to rename, just call your group arrow. Okay, so we now have everything set up ready to make your macro. To make a macro, it's worth you can just drag select all your nodes, it doesn't matter. But to make things tidier, if you select your nodes in the order that you want the controls to appear in your macro, it sort of keeps things tidy. So the first thing we're going to need is our 5 text input fields. So select text 1, now press and hold Control key, next text, and so on. After our text controls, we're going to have our choice drop down, which is in C. And then finally, we're going to have our transform node, which is our overall size and position. Once you've got those selected, still with Control key held down, press A. That will select all your other nodes. You don't need the media out, so still with Control pressed, just drag over media out to cancel it. And now you can let go of your Control key. Put your mouse over any of the nodes, right click, go to macro, create macro. Don't worry, you won't have a screen full of macros. And this brings up your macro creation dialog box. First thing, give your macro a name. Now we need to work down all these controls and pick the ones we need. So from text 1, close where it says image. You're at text and you just click on style text. You can leave this as style text or you can change the label. All these middle bits are just labels that can be typed over. So if we change it, what I'm also going to do, drag select Control C to copy that text. So once you've got your style text, you don't need anything else for this because we're not going to be changing the font or the style or the color. All we need is the input field. So text 1, do the same for text 2, close the image, style text, select style text, and just paste to put your response in, and this is response 2, and so on. Response 3. Four. And 5. Next you come to C, which is our control. Now you can see if any of these are red, then they've got something checked. And up to now we haven't actually gone into C to check anything. But by default, because C, which is here, isn't attached to anything, it assumes that we want an output from it, and we don't. So you need to uncheck output. Come down to response and check response, and you can rename it to whatever you want. And finally, in the transform, we want center and size, and again you can rename them to whatever you want. Once you've got all your labels and all your controls checked, so we've got our macro set up with all our controls, come to the three dots at the top of the macro window, click Save As Group, and your Finder window will pop up again. I will leave the paths in the description. I've got mine set up to automatically go to where I want it. You're looking to save it in the Blackmagic design folder, in Fusion, in templates, in edit, and then in titles. And then you just click save and you're done. I'm not going to save it because I've already done it. But once you've saved, you can close out of everything and go back to the edit page, and in your titles you will now have your Oblivion dialog. As I said earlier, drag it in, stick your mouse over it. In your inspector you will end up with a text tab, or possibly end up with a text tab. You might have all the controls on one page. I slightly adjusted the text input field so that it was only one line, and I think that's kind of why mine have ended up on a separate text tab. All these you can change. If you only want 3 answers, you can just delete the text from the last 2. Your controls, your response picks which text gets the highlight. Obviously, if you've only got 3 texts, then picking highlight number 5 won't do anything. Overall position does what it says on the tin. It lets you change where on the screen you want to put it, and then size does the same. So yeah, that's basically it. As I say, it doesn't need to be Oblivion themed. You can change the font, you can change the image and make it Valorant themed, or I don't know, whatever you want themed, I suppose. But it's just a way of having some sort of dialog box that you can show a response on. Anyway, as I say, a bit niche, but hopefully you've learned some bits and pieces along the way. Please feel free to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell, and I will catch you on the next one. Cheers!